Hello, everyone. Welcome to Scottish Volleyball SVlearn for coming back for the second year after a successful year last year. This year, hopefully, going to run it in a little bit of a different way, as we've explained in our social media trailer. So, looking forward to this being the start of the coaching series, which we'll have before Christmas this year. We're starting off with Mac Barron from Meraki Volleyball Club in the USA. We're going to be really looking at how we utilize technology and really using your time wisely when coaching. So really appreciate Mac giving us some time today. So thanks very much. Yeah, we'll just start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, like your volleyball journey, your career from being a junior all the way up to where we are now.
Yeah, for sure. Really excited to be here. This should be a lot of fun. Excited to kind of hopefully help educate some more people and give people a chance to learn some new stuff. Maybe we'll see.
Awesome.
So yeah, I started off. My parents were both players themselves, so that's I kind of fell into volleyball, and then from there I was kind of seeing my mom coach a lot, and kind of wanted to get into coaching, but started off playing when I was about 11, maybe 12. Not formally, because we don't have a lot of men's volleyball at that young age in the States. Really started like competitively playing around 13 or 14 on a club team. And then we didn't have middle school volleyball for boys. So I had to wait until about high school to start playing. We did not have high school volleyball at my high school. So we started a team, which was pretty cool. So my junior year, or when I was about 16, 17, is when we kind of got a team in high school. And all this time I had been playing club. And yeah, then I went on to the University of New Hampshire and played club ball there while also being the manager for the women's Division One program. There's a mid-major program in D1, so not like the massive USC's or Power Five program, but a little smaller than that in size. And so, yeah, we won three conference titles while I was there. It's pretty cool. Got to learn a ton from the coaches there, Jill Hershinger and Stacy Barnett, which was a lot of fun. And then went on to coach at Jacksonville University with Julie Darty as a volunteer there for a year. And then I kind of realized not super into the college space. I thought that's what I wanted to do. My degree is also in kinesiology and sports studies. And then after I realized I didn't want to coach college, I kind of moved into, well, maybe I can go back home and start a program that kind of helps solve some of the problems I had when I was a kid, where there wasn't boys younger and there wasn't as many younger programs. So I started a club along with my mom, who's been a coach for about 30 years or more. And yeah, that was in 2017. And I stepped away from that after being acquired by League One Volleyball, which has started the pro leagues in the US, which is pretty cool. And they were part of our program, or we were part of them for about 3 years. And then I kind of realized I wanted to change my direction a little bit and start looking at maybe coach education as something I would do, or even kind of getting into technology and stuff within sport. So yeah, that's where it started and where we're at now.
Nice, quite a condensed one there, which is really good. It's nice to hear that.
Yeah.
When did you realize? Because a lot of players kind of go through their playing career and they're like, I've got no interest in doing anything else apart from playing. When was the point where you were kind of like, hey, I think coaching is where I want to be, like where I want to take my volleyball journey?
Yeah, so I always knew that like coaching in like high school and like not for a lot of money was a thing just because my mom was doing it the whole time. Back when we were playing, my sister was also playing at the same time. She's about 4 years younger than me. And so my mom, because we couldn't super afford club, she would coach to offset the cost. So I knew it was there.
Yeah.
But it was when I got to about, I think 15, 16, when I was at a gold medal squared camp. They kind of do camps all over the country. I worked for them for a little while. Really cool company. But GMS had people come to our high school and do a camp in our gym, which was awesome because we didn't have to travel, but brought with it some clinicians from around the country. A couple guys from BYU came, and a couple of them had coached at a higher level and kind of mentioned to us, like, yeah, so I'm a college coach. And I was like, wait, what? Like, you can do that for a job? And they're like, yeah, you can. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm more interested now because I knew around my junior year, that when I went out to California and went to Pepperdine University for a camp, where 12-year-olds were like heads and shoulders better than me, I was like, I don't know if playing is in the cards forever here. It might be I need to find a different avenue to like continue the thing I like, which is the sport. So that's kind of when I like started looking at coaching more. And then I got super inspired by Mark Dunphy when I was at Pepperdine. He's so smart and so thoughtful with how he approaches like coach and athlete relationship, and his leadership style is really cool. Plus, he was always very current and data driven coach, so it was cool to learn from someone who had like coached in the Olympics. So yeah, that's kind of when I got the bug a little bit.
Nice. That's cool. It's always nice to hear when people kind of feel like they make that transition and what they kind of do
Yeah.
and stuff. So yeah, I think going on to a little bit more modern day, kind of you're talking about building a club. You're talking about your mum used to be a coach. How was that conversation with your mum when you were kind of like, "Hey, mum, I'm going to set up a volleyball club"? Like, did she think that was a crazy idea, or was she kind of fully on board? Because I know she worked with you at the club for quite a while. Does she still work for?
She's actually still at the club.
Yeah. So
She
yeah,
just went through tryouts, and I was like, "How was that?"
yeah,
I'm like, "Oh, I got a break from club tryouts." But no, she it was while I was coaching at Jacksonville, so about 2016, 2017. I was in Florida, and I called her and was like, "I have an idea," and she kind of I could like hear her roll her eyes from across the country. And I was like, we've always talked about how a lot of clubs don't quite do it the way we would want to do it. What if we started a club? And this was like my kind of heat check on like, am I being crazy or is this an idea? And for the longest pause on planet Earth, I was like, what do you think? Should we do this? And she was like, yeah, I think that's a great idea. But for like, my world was like, ah. So we had a really good time starting it. It's tough when you working with family is hard. But once you kind of know each other, and the trust factor was really important for me at least. Um, but yeah, starting was that was the main impetus, was just like calling mom and being like, "Hey, is this a good?" I was 23 years old, so I wasn't an established adult quite yet. I think the prefrontal cortex had just started fully functioning, so
nice. You kind of made a thing there. You were saying like feeling that a lot of clubs didn't quite do it the way that you would like to do it. Like, can you expand on that a little bit and then what that kind of put in the forefront of your mind when building that club? Like, what was like the start of the club building to kind of where it was when you moved on, handed it over to LOVB and everything like that. And we'll kind of hopefully chat about that transition a little bit later on. But what did the start look like? After that phone call to mum, what kind of came next?
the next step was a lot of the like groundwork. So I mean, most club directors know that, and probably most coaches inherently know this, they just don't realize it, is that you need three major things. You need a facility, you need coaches, and then you need some pretty basic equipment, and a little bit of money potentially, but not necessarily. But so the first thing that we had to figure out was like, where would we practice? And in the US, in our area, finding a school to practice out is hard. You usually have to find like a boys and girls club like we did, or another sports facility. And in the Northeast, they're really expensive. So we were kind of, that was the first big thing. We knew we had two coaches, and then it was okay, let's start with facility. Because if we didn't have that, we weren't like announcing we were doing anything. It was we needed to secure the facility and do that stuff. So while I was still in Jacksonville, Florida, my mom started kind of going around and looking for spaces. And then I started to work on the more like marketing side and the what do we want this to be, like the documentation really of like what are our values going to be, what do we care about, trying to essentially create a brand, if you would, for like what it was going to look like. So that first year we started with like two teams and maybe like 25 kids. And by the time I left we were at about 15 teams and a full developmental pipeline, and then about 250, 300 athletes. Um, the big change that like kind of supercharged us was adding programming. So like we started off with just two teams because that's what we had envisioned. But in reality, and we could kind of get into this later, is like one of my biggest mistakes that I feel was we didn't just start with like programs and like training kids and then figuring out what worked, what our philosophy was, right? Like you can say what you want the philosophy to be and what you want the club to be about. But until you're like rubber meets road and you're actually doing it, you don't know how you're going to actually attain that. So for us, it was something that we kind of learned with teams, which we probably could have done a better job of. But that's kind of how it started and where we kind of were when I left.
So I think many questions, but I think the next one mark would be you're kind of talking there about how you started with a couple of teams, but you kind of wish, looking back at it now, you kind of started more on that programming side. And
Yeah.
so if you were going to do it again, what do you think that would look like? You know, if we've got people in Scotland that are maybe setting up a club and starting that with like a with teams obviously is the easiest way because we've got leagues and everything, but what do you think that could look like and ideally to you?
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit. I mean, it depends too. Like each area is going to be different, right? Like know your market, know where you are, know what kind of people you have around. But there was a coach that was in New Hampshire, named Joan Forge, and she's now the coach at Plymouth State University. She was a high school coach forever. She won a ton of state titles, like a lot. And she said something that really stuck to me for our area. And she was like, my job is to make sure that kids pick volleyball over soccer or football when they're in middle school. And I was like, yeah, that's a very good point. Like if they pick volleyball instead, we get a bigger pipeline. And so for a lot of what I would try to focus on is that younger age group and then building teams and waiting until they are literally begging us to start teams because they're like, no one else does it right. Like, we don't want to go over here or over there, or it's just too far. Sometimes that's the case. Um, or their next age group, they're gonna have a coach they don't like, just because of whatever. But I would definitely be in the space where I would start with just like academy style programming where they come in, you put them on a little team for 6 weeks or 10 weeks, and you have practice once a week, twice a week. But then after 6 weeks, you're done. So you have like microcosm of a club program that you can then train coaches in. You can have maybe two teams and have them play each other a little bit. And maybe you only have up to like U13. That's fine. But the way that I would do it is wait until you get to a point where you're like, okay, we now understand how to get the pipeline and the base. Because if you don't have that base of the pyramid to like kind of build on, um, you end up in a position where you don't have any kids left at the top. We had a notoriously had the problem at our club of we didn't have as many older kids. And it's because we weren't around for a million years. Some of the clubs around us were around for 30 years. Um, and they continuously had older kids. And I've heard the argument as well that that doesn't, if you don't have older kids, they don't have something to aspire to, which like fair, but like programming makes way more money than club does for us, at least in the US. The margins are much higher. And also, you're appealing to a bigger group of people because not everyone wants to play all the time. Like in the US, right? Our season for club is like, it's a slog. It's like 6, 7 months, maybe even 8 in some cases. So, like, starting with that smaller group and finding those couple of kids that are super obsessed with it, and then make a team out of those kids. Don't just take any kids when you start because you don't know what you're going to get. Um, and then you get the obsessed kids with the obsessed parents that want to kind of go the distance, and you can kind of create a club out of that. But yeah, if I were to go back, I would start with literally the smallest age group I probably could, and just do because if you're good at training kindergartners or 6 year olds and 7 year olds, and they get nasty and they go to another club, now you also have other clubs being like, where'd this kid come from? Like, and no one wants that space. No one, a lot of people in the US don't fight over 6 and 7 year olds. You know what I mean? It's like a completely open market in a lot of areas that people just neglect. And it's like that's your feeder though. If you get them in there and they buy into your brand and they're loyal because your program is good, you could probably keep them all the way to 18. And the ones you don't, it's okay because you have more kids coming as opposed to the top down model where you might have the ability to get like a fantastic team, but that's only good so far down. Once you get to like 15s, right? Like the 15-year-olds are idealizing the 18-year-olds, but after that, the 14-year-olds don't know who those kids are. They
Yeah,
don't really care.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's what I do. And then lessons as well. I would probably push just because you can get coaches to learn a lot when they're only focused on one athlete.
Mhm.
They can learn a lot about themselves and how they interact with an athlete and how to not interact with an athlete by being one on one because it's easier for them to focus. I've found that like even 2 or 3 people in a lesson is really nice for a coach because you're like, okay, I want you to focus on teaching them this thing. They're like, okay, I can do that because there's only 3 of them. There's not 25 of them. And you're like, this is too much. I don't know what to do with all these kids. Or there's too many things that they notice, right? As a coach, you're like trained to see what's wrong. And so then all they focus on is what's wrong. But
Yeah,
yeah, that is definitely how I would start.
that's cool. I think the model here is quite clearly very much kind of like team based. Like we kind of go to teams quite quickly. I think you don't tend to have as much just programs going on, so especially that really young age, that just doesn't happen a huge amount in Scotland. So it'd be nice to see if some clubs can start to push that through. And also as well, those individual lessons with 1 or 2 athletes is very rare, partly to do with hall costs and everything. But I think that's something
I
that could benefit
we
players.
we have a lot of space that's green in the like summertime, right? So during COVID, a big thing that I did that I recommend anyone to try is go down to the meadows and take a net and you can just have a lesson with a kid. It doesn't you need 3 balls. You don't have to be like and you don't have to have it all figured out either. If the kid walks away with like 2 or 3 things that they feel like they learned, you've done a good job. And just make it hourly and start costing no money and then build it up. And you'll have kids talk to kids and they'll be like, oh, Coach Danny was amazingly helpful. Like he did an hour long session with me. It cost $50 and it was totally worth it. Um, but I mean, also know your market, know the kids. But if you find 2 or 3 kids that want to do that, they get some training is better than none.
Yeah.
More court time is better than none. But we did a lot of grass
Okay.
because it removes that facility problem, which is
Yeah.
just like, how do I do this without it costing $1 million? That and the sand is also great. But the sand can be tough for
Yeah.
like movement, especially with like younger kids. Like you end up teaching them more about how to move than you do about volleyball.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think one of our clubs that's kind of shown some success now is Glasgow Outdoor Volleyball Club, and as the name
Mhm.
says, they started outdoors, and we had 3 or 4 of the girls that were in the under 18s national team last year when they went away to Malta. So yeah, it shows they still do a lot of that outdoor stuff during
Yeah.
the summer. They're now indoor as well. So I think that's a huge kind of positive. Got local clubs like Nuvok that do a lot of the stuff over the summer in the meadows outdoor. So definitely something for a lot of other clubs to build on. And like you say, maybe it's more small group stuff with individual coaches, which might be beneficial. So I think that's something some of our coaches can take from that. And I know we're kind of saying everyone thinks, oh, America, great weather all the time. I know that where was based up in Connecticut, like you're the same as here. You know those 3 months before Christmas and 3 months afterwards, it's cold and wet and not very nice to be
Yeah.
outside. So I know that.
Outside in the Northeast in the US is not yet, no. I mean, you could argue in the US that like, right, those like 3 sections, the East, Central, and the West, like the West and Central have a big advantage when it comes to volleyball because they have the ability to play outside year round if they want to. And it's cheaper. Whereas for us, we're inside and we're competing with limited space just because literally have less space than Texas or a California for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I definitely think that doing small group team-based stuff is great. Like, and it doesn't, I think one thing that I did want to mention is it doesn't have to be 6v6. You can do 4v4 with younger kids. And honestly, that's better for them because six people on the court is confusing.
Mhm.
Three in the back and one in the front setting is way less confusing. You're just like, you have your lane, man. You're in charge of that side. You need to figure it out. Is a lot easier. And then making the court smaller for them, right? Trying to make it okay if your kids aren't able to deal with that bigger area, make it smaller, get the rallies going because that's where they're going to actually learn. They're not going to learn if the ball just comes over the net and dies.
Yeah, for sure. I think like we talk about the growth of the club getting bigger and bigger. I know that where you are, Connecticut, it's not exactly the big, it's not a big, massive volleyball community up there, but so there's a lot, and there's a few clubs, we obviously know some of the same clubs, like I know Northeast up there as well, that with Kat and Garrett. But
Yeah.
we kind of talk about like the growth came from word of mouth. How did you find kind of the growth, bringing in the players, especially bringing in new coaches and kind of building that coaching culture and kind of how did the growth of the club happen? Did you find little issues going on, or was it quite smooth, kind of bringing in the right
Uh,
coaches, finding the right way to do things? Like how did that go? How did everything build?
yeah, so like it's definitely not, it was not smooth. I finding coaches is a struggle. I think everywhere. It's the universal bane of a club director is trying to find more coaches. Um, yeah, even in the States, we don't have. You would think we would have more because we have a lot of more players in general. But like people don't have time to just sacrifice multiple weekends in a row to go coach club. Um, what I started using a lot was I used LinkedIn a ton. I went in and typed in volleyball, and every single human that came up that was in within a certain area, I was like, "Hey, do you want to coach?" Set up the coaching application like that. I got several coaches that way. Um, Also, just like word of mouth, right? So through playing, we have a pretty strong adult scene in New England, thanks to our region of USA Volleyball called Yankee Volleyball, and we go in and play in tournaments. My dad still plays a little bit, but I have a bunch of friends that are like lifelong friends that are still playing. So it'd be like, hey, Johnny's pretty good. Like, is he interested in coaching? He'd be like, no, you don't want him to coach. Or it'd be like, hey, is Joey good? And they'd be like, yeah, actually, he'd be a great coach. So we'd find people that way. Um, and then the last one was just parents. Some parents had played, some parents were just wanted to be involved. And we kind of took a stance a little later that, like, for some reason, there's this thought process, I think, in not just volleyball, but in a lot of sport that, like, you have to have played the sport to be able to teach it. And it's like, I slowly have started pushing back on that because, yeah, you don't maybe understand like some of the nuances, but that doesn't mean you can't teach someone how to pass a ball. It doesn't mean you can't teach someone technically how to serve a ball. I mean, for example, like some of the most winningest coaches in NCAA women's history are Russ Rose and John Dunning. Neither of them played volleyball.
Yeah.
That never. I mean, they know how to like down ball and hit like the occasional ball, but like they never played on a court ever. And they both have between them, I think, almost 20 national titles.
Yeah.
So you don't have to necessarily be a really phenomenal player to be a good coach. You know, I would honestly argue sometimes it's better to be a bad player and then become a coach because you had to teach yourself and actually learn. Whereas when you have that like natural athletic ability that you see in an athlete, you're like, and and then they go to teach a kid, they're like, "Well, just do it," and they're like, "What do you mean, just do it?" I don't get it. So it was a lot of trying to teach the moms and different people like how to train and how to coach. Um, we used them as assistant coaches a lot because they were superstars in their normal job. You get like, I had one woman who was like in charge of like program managers at a medical device company, makes like high six figures every single year, and she was a great coach. not going to be a great coach at the international collegiate level, but she's a great 15s assistant or 15s head coach for a couple of years. And is she going to learn stuff? Yeah, she can do what she's already doing. It's very easy for her to learn how to train, but you have to actually teach them, which is, I think, this thought process that is not proliferated everywhere is like teaching your coaches. It's kind of an assumption like, oh, well, we hired you and now you're just going to coach. It's like, okay, but there needs to be some educational thought process, especially if you want a consistent culture across your program and across like consistent values, consistent accountability as well. Like you need to teach that. It doesn't just like come into being. So I think that's how we found coaches a lot of the time. We had to get quite creative in some situations, and sometimes we hired people. I was definitely a hire quickly, see how they do, and if they were terrible or awful, it was like, okay, I'm sorry, but this isn't working, and you're not listening, and we're not doing a great job for these kids, so like you need to go. Whereas I think some people wait until they have to have the perfect coach, and it's like that's never going to happen. This is a business, but at the same time, like we're only paying coaches a couple $1,000 max in most situations. So I'm sure it's the same here. There are coaches in club situations that make a lot of money, but usually money is not a huge driver for them.
Yeah, I think any coach that makes money in this country is very fortunate. There's a lot of coaches that make zero money, but I think
Or negative money.
yeah, I think the point you're making about you don't have to be a player to coach is huge. I think might clip that one and put that on the socials because I think it's really interesting to have. Like, there are a lot of parents that come along that maybe want that are unsure about getting involved, but have the skills that they need to kind of help out. Couple of things like what would you look for in some of those like parents or people coming in that maybe don't have the volleyball experience, but also how would you get them up to speed to be like effective coaches? Like you say, they're not going to have the technical ability for demonstrating or for maybe what they're looking for, but how
Yeah.
how do you help develop them as a coach, and what is the aspect that you're seeing in them that you're like, hey, you're doing we can work with this? Where are those two things?
With the parents, it's buy-in. They want their kid to do well, so like they're going to be invested. That is the huge piece of it. Is just like they want this to go well, so they're invested in the thought process. Um, so I'm looking for buy-in usually. I'm looking for because it is pretty thankless in a lot of ways. My mom constantly says it's a lot more thankless now than it used to be. And so that's a big piece. I would also say I'm looking for someone who does like the basic stuff, like shows up on time. Like if we have the interview and you don't log in on time, I'm paying attention. Um, if they're talking about winning all the time, I get a little concerned. Um, I want to win, but in my mind, the score takes care of itself. It's a byproduct of good volleyball, good teaching, good training. It's not we won because we just like figured out some magical way to score the system. It's like making money. Like you can't just like the quick get rich scheme isn't necessarily going to work every time. It might work, but it's not going to work a lot. We're looking for like sustained growth. So I'm looking for people who are interested in development. And then people who aren't making it all about themselves. So sometimes you'll get a coach that's like, it's mostly about them winning or their ego. And once they let their ego get out of the way, they could become a good coach. But if we're not seeing a change in that ego over 2 years, like I might be like, okay, we're not having you back. Um, it really depends on the person. Because each person is it's just like coaching, right? Each coach that you get in the door is going to have such a different situation that those are some like KPIs and like big things that we would look for. But in general, it's more the basic stuff. Are you going to be on time? Are you going to care? Do you generally care about the same stuff that we care about? Um, and then are you curious, right? Like, do you want to grow? Do you want to get better at this? Or are you just here like, right? You could have the parent who comes in and they're super invested, but they're there to be political and push for their kid to be the first starter or whatever. That's a little different, right? Like, can we make that change? Maybe, maybe not, which is the risk that we're kind of taking. Um, but yeah, I would say that that's kind of like what I'm looking for. As far as getting them up to speed, I would say that um, when we started, I had this system of there was no system. There were two of us, like, and we both like it was me and my mom. Like, we know a lot of the same stuff. She would teach me stuff, I would teach her stuff. It was great, especially just after coming out of college and doing all the like advanced coaching classes and stuff. We had a lot of stuff we could kind of put together. After we started growing, we started noticing like, okay, we need to. It's me getting someone up to speed each time we bring on a new person is just a terrible system. So what I started doing was implementing like a full onboarding system, right? So essentially, someone come on, we'd go through the same process or the standard operating procedure of like hiring them. After that, it would be okay, you're going to start your onboarding. Here is a list of all the Google slide decks that I want you to go through. There are quizzes at the end of every single one of them so that I know if you're failing them, that you're not paying attention. And if you're getting them right, at least you're going back and looking like you're hitting the things that we really care about. And in that way, I had way less questions. It was automated. I didn't have to do anything. Maybe an occasional check on the quizzes to see if someone was actually doing it, especially with younger coaches that would come in. I'd be like, did you actually do that? But in general, having a system like that also made it so that all of us were on the same page. Did some people miss stuff? Yeah. Did some people forget stuff? Yeah, because they're human. But in general, if you give someone a good onboarding and train them relatively well before they show up to the court, and you have in that document little things like where do the balls go? How do you sign up for the membership? Like I did a bunch of screen grabs of the spaces where like the websites that they would go to and just put like little arrows on slide decks and was like, okay, go to this website, click on this, click on this, click on this. Cause some of those websites are just antiquated as all heck. They're tough to get through. And so when you're not used to doing it, like we are as directors, we do it all the time. They're like, it's a put off, especially for someone who's like, oh, I have to sign up for this. I have to do this thing. And I tried to make it so easy that like a little kid could do it. I used my mom's not great at technology. She was my litmus test for like, okay, is this reasonable to have you do? And she's like, yep, I figured it out. So anybody can do it. And I was like, yes. So having that person is super helpful. If your grandparents can do it, you're good. But it made it so much easier for us to speak the same language, use the same wording. Um, and later, what I started doing was I got more and more tech forward with it and found, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this, but I'm also going to record myself going through the slide deck. And now made it so that if someone's on a drive or whatnot to practice and they need to do this training, just listen to it. You don't need necessarily a ton of slide deck, but maybe there's some points where you're like, oh shoot, I do need to listen to that later or watch that later. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is get coaches and people who have very limited amounts of time to ingest more information when they're already the type of people that are trying to say yes to everything. Because they said yes to you. So ergo, they're probably invested in a couple other things too. So I tried to make it as easy as humanly possible, and try to make it so that it was not confusing because I feel like that puts a lot of coaches off because they're already stressed about other things at work. They don't need to be stressed about volleyball stuff. So that was the big one. And then we try to do on like more training options and documentation so that when they were in the middle of season, right, and they have a question about hotels, I made sure that they knew, hey, go to this dashboard on our website. And I've linked all this stuff for you so that if you do have a question, go find it in there before you reach out to me because I'm going to be slower with 30 coaches reporting to me than you going in there and looking. And you can do that any time of day and you won't have to wait for me. And that also made it so that like I had to keep up documentation a lot, but it also meant that I wasn't answering 8,000 emails a day from parents and players and coaches. Um, I know it was mainly about coaches, but like that is how I kind of kept them up to speed and then kind of or got them there and then kept them up to speed. I'm actually working on an application right now that kind of puts together a learning management system or like an onboarding system so that coaches and directors can kind of do this along with a practice planner and a notes section that has all the documentation so that a club director can kind of manage their coaches all in one place instead of trying to use a bunch of like trying to use every single different system we can think of from Google Sheets all the way to Teams. Like it's silly. Like we should have something simpler than that. But yeah, so that's kind of how I would get them up to speed.
Cool. I'm definitely going to ask you more about the app because I know we've chatted about it already. I'll ask you a
Yeah.
little bit about that later. I just didn't know if we were going to have that embargoed or not. So I'm glad
No.
you brought it up so I'll prep you with questions later. I think, yeah, you've talked a little bit there about or a lot there about the kind of utilizing the technology and utilizing kind of videos and slides and everything like that to get the new coaches up to speed and kind of utilizing it as well to kind of help with the administration side. How did you find, because how did you find like pushing them towards kind of different online material to up level their coaching? Like what else, once they got past that kind of beginning administrating stage, like
Yeah.
what were the next stages? How do you, because as you say, you can't just be running coaching clinics every week to help the
No,
coaches. How do
it's
you get the coaches to that next step
really
to kind of keep
hard.
learning, you know?
Um, Me and a friend of mine, who I think a few of the Scottish volleyball folks met the other day at CEV, his name's Eric Hodgson. We
Yeah.
talk about this all the time. He's convinced that like we need more in-person clinics because everything's now online, right? And that like connection is gone. I think that, and this is me thinking about it, but also like it was tough. Honestly, I don't know that I don't want to say we were super successful in the like continued education space. It was something that I was kind of working towards as we got more stable. But I think that there's a big thing to be said for a community-based idea of like it needs to be a space where like the best version of social media, right? So like you essentially, I think, getting coaches to a space where they can all help each other in little ways with little posts here and there. Hey, I reflected on this and I think this, but like in a microcosm of just your coaches is pretty powerful. And making the hardest part is the cultural piece of getting it to be okay to share the failures and okay to like consistently talk to each other. I think that is a very powerful piece. It's not necessarily the like they go to a clinic and they learn something important. It's more like you kind of need to infect or get two or three of your coaches to be the like forward leaning ones, maybe. It's just like a bell curve, right? You've got we've all got these coaches, the early adopters who are like they're trying almost too hard to do new things to the point where you're like, is this real? Like, where did you find this? And then like the split step kills me. It's like that's more of a like that's come all the way back around. And then all the way down to like the people who have been doing the same thing for 45 years and they're just gonna keep doing it because they won a title 20 years ago and the kids seem happy, so they're just gonna keep doing it. And then you've got everybody in the middle. But trying to get those early adopters maybe and figuring out who those people are to kind of like lead the charge of like, hey, all right, we're going to be the people that go try the stuff and want to do that. And then when the other coaches peer wise see them successful, they'd be like, what are you doing? And that creates some social pressure, right? Because the coaches who've been doing the same thing for 45 years, they're not changing anyways. You could beat their head into a wall and they're not going to change. But you can also phase them out in different ways, or you can find the niche where they're good and just let them go. Trying to manhandle or push them into the places they don't want to be in is honestly counterproductive. And there's probably areas that they can lead in all the areas, but some areas that you're like, but Johnny, we don't want you to talk about we don't want you to talk about the punishments you give the kids after they lose game. In the middle though, I would say that getting like the mass majority to like adapt is more about figuring out what each coach is invested or interested in. because right, you've got that coach on staff who's like obsessed with numbers. Okay, well, let's introduce you to ball time and try to get you to talk me through like, or even just looking at what their general like jobs are too. If you've got someone who's into stats and statistics and like probability and that kind of stuff, you're like, dude, look at what ball time can do. I'm going to show you all the stats that it kind of pulls out. And you're like, oh, that's really cool. Your social guy or someone who's obsessed with social media, like have them one help you with your social media, but two, have them help you highlight the kids on the socials because they want to go into ball time and find all the clips of the kids doing well. And that's a whole other piece of like coaching because now you're creating relationships where the club, they feel part of the club. Um, but in or just using that like person who likes to watch video, right? And ball time is a great and easy example for me right now because I've used it. We used it a lot. Was like you can go in there and comment on stuff. Not every coach is gonna. I feel like there's this thought process you want every coach to be good at everything, and it's like that's just not gonna. That's not even true at the college game or the international game. Like there are coaches that are good at some stuff and they're not good at other stuff. There's some coaches usually. I think it's like a running joke that like some coaches are really good at 0 to 1 and some coaches are really good at like from 1 to 2 but not good from zero. No one's phenomenal from 0 to 2. It's like you gotta kind of pick your battles a little bit and figuring out where your staff belongs in the kind of ecosystem that you have is a big part of that. Because putting the wrong coaches in the wrong place can be very bad. But yeah, I think like the continued education piece is like making sure they have access, making sure that you have a couple of early adopters running around trying new stuff and they're successful and that they share. Um, and then that's one of the things that League One was great for was that like you could see other clubs that you weren't necessarily competing with doing things well and be like, hey, bud, how did you do that? What did you do there? Like you guys have been really successful. What did you do? So that was, I mean, that's really helpful. And then lastly, just making sure that they also feel safe to try new things. Because sometimes if you focus on the success too much, they're like, I don't want to try something new. Or maybe they're scared of parents. There's any number of things that could be going on in one coach's head. I really tried in my last couple of years to try and teach all the coaches like they were athletes and start to look at like, right, the metrics of we think in terms of coaching of, all right, you've got your good passer, setter, attacker, whatever your 5 or 6 skills are, right? And then you've got the soft skills. For me, it was like, okay, so and so is really great at teaching these things, really need to work on their understanding of tactics or rotations or whatnot. And it would be like, okay, how can I help them with this in a way that's not going to make them feel stupid? And try to make it so that they search for the things on their own, but also that I'm giving them small bite-sized things that make them feel cared about. Right. So like if I'm talking to them we would do like monthly meetings, I might be like, what are you feeling like you're struggling with right now? And that's honestly just a starting point of like their self-awareness. And they might be like, oh, I really don't feel comfortable with this. And it might be something they're actually really good at. And you're like, no, you're so good at that. I'm actually more concerned about this area over here. How you talked to Jimmy the other day at practice was not great, man. We need to talk about how you're dealing with conflict with the athletes. But your tactical understanding is phenomenal. So I think knowing your coaches, just like kind of our number one rule when I was in college was know your athletes. Once you start coaching coaches, you got to know the coaches that you have and what they're good and bad at. Which is essentially the giant answer to that is it depends. But yeah, that's kind of how I would go about it or how I think about it.
I think some like really interesting points there. You know, it's kind of a lot of the coaches in this country, we kind of coach on our own in a gym hall with just you and a lot of kids. It's also, you know, it's nice to have other people around that kind of complement your skill set. Like I love working with the national team, and one of the first things, one of the first coaches I brought in was Fiona Welsh. You know, she's was a middle blocker. She played for the national team for quite a few years. You know, and I was like, she's got an expertise there that I don't have. So it's been awesome to have her as part of the program and working with the the middles and being able to have that strength and knowledge that she can transfer to them. Same now, I've got like Liam Darling's working with us, and albeit he's a libero and I've played libero as well, but his understanding and his skill set on that defensive side of the game is huge. So it's really great to have people that complement your skills. So I think that's huge. Like you say, that collaborative piece of kind of get coaches sharing and working together is huge. I think we're we're not as our clubs are usually not as big as the clubs in the States like you'd be working for, but it might be a whole area like Nuvok and Jets and City of Edinburgh all together could kind of collaborate and work together.
Yeah.
So
And
that's something that
it's cool that
hopefully
you guys are doing stuff like this too, where like you're giving back to them in a way where they can get on and learn about these things. It's tough though. Sometimes it does feel like you're like leading a horse to water. It's like, come on. But I think creating the system where you get a few that are really interested in it, and then you just pump them full of it, and you're like, oh, dude, I found this really cool thing. Here's this really cool thing, and they're getting really excited about it. It puts the other people in a position where they're like, what's Johnny doing? I don't how did they win that game? I don't understand. And suddenly when they start asking questions, it becomes, oh, well, I'm looking at this stuff. And it's like, oh, which is a slow burn. Like it's not by any means a quick process. Yeah.
now, one of the things I was going to ask about was you talked about Love B. I know a little bit about it. A lot of people will know that's like the new professional league that started last year in the US. But
Yeah.
underneath that, it's a big investment group that kind of has been buying up volleyball clubs all across the country, putting in money and kind of resources and everything like that.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's like I've known about it, not been able to speak to any clubs that have kind of had that investment. So kind of
Yeah.
chatting to you about it, it's been quite interesting finding out about it. How did you find that process of being kind of like self-contained, being on your own, and then kind of being taken over by a massive multi-million dollar company that's, was there fears involved in that? Did you see huge benefits? I know you're not part of it now, but still a Love B
Yeah.
club and you're away from Meraki, but like, yeah, what was that like those few years that you were there working with Love B? How did you find that process and kind of helping with that, utilizing their technology and what did they have? A lot of
Yeah,
questions.
so love or League One is kind of how they like identify themselves. It's really in my mind a phenomenal model. Honestly, kind of based on European like and general like outside the US models of like, okay, why don't we have pro teams at the top of our clubs? And so I think that a couple of the different people that were involved, like early on with League One, kind of went through the process of just being like, they had made money in different ways. You've been involved with pretty large organizations to the point where they were like, why isn't this sport bigger in the US? Like, we have a massive amount of players. There's no pro league, there's no real communication about it. And so they were like, we should start one. And the approach they took was to start with getting a good base. In all honesty, now that I'm saying it out loud, it sounds a lot like what I was talking about earlier, like getting programming set up. Like they have a money making base of clubs on the bottom that can then fuel their pro leagues instead of just doing pro teams, which like kudos to other programs that are doing that. I think the other one is Major League Volleyball or MLV that just merged with Pro Federation. But like just doing a pro league, I understand the general idea, but I love that Love is doing a model of like community up and trying to create the situation where you have the ability for like a great example is a lot of these clubs, right? Like bigger clubs. So like let's go with A5, massive club, um, very successful. It's constantly putting out pro players, high level D1 players, really good program. Um, they now have the ability where at their practices they have a huge facility because they run events and they have, I mean, I think they have like a 16 court facility, if not bigger than that. It's huge, right? Like they've done really well for themselves. They're in a good spot. But you also add in the ability when a 12-year-old walks into that facility, they get to happen upon the pro team practicing for Atlanta. And that's like every kid's like we have taken the like superstar aspect of it and brought it down to the level of like the community and said like, hey, you can come watch practice. Now, instead of it being like feeling like that's out of reach for a lot of people, they're suddenly like, okay. Plus, the representation matters for them to be able to see more women pro anything is huge. So I feel like they're doing a really good job as far as. So that's what made me like when we sold to them. It was 2022, I think. When we sold to them, that was one of my big things. Was I was really excited about what their mission was and what they were trying to do as an end goal. I believed in that model and still do. And I also really liked the people that I was working with. And the other big thing was the idea of I kind of mentioned this a little earlier, is that like that network of coaches and clubs that are not competing with each other necessarily because they're so far away. Some of them are competing on a national level because some of them are like there's like 4 or 5 clubs that represent the like top, they're all in like the top 20 clubs in the country, but like most of us weren't in that space, so it's like yeah, we weren't going to nationals and winning titles or anything. We were a pretty small club, but it definitely gave us something to aspire to as a smaller club, and also gave us the resources to reach out to those club directors and to do things that to be able to like kind of get a peek behind the curtain, right? Um, the first thing I just thought of too is back in was it 2016, me and my friend Virginia Pham, who's actually working with the national team now, we went and kind of volunteered with the national team, and I was doing it just because I called and did an interview with Karch for a school project. And at the end of the call, I was like, Karch, if there's anything I can do to like help, I don't know what it would be, but I would love to be involved in some way, shape, or form. He's like, yeah, come volunteer for a week. So I was like, I'm taking you up on that. So I flew out and stayed in the crappiest hotel on planet Earth, and then went and shagged and stuff. And it was really nice to see that the national team training looked a lot like my training, just at a lower level and not nearly as technical, right? Um, but it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I do kind of know what I'm doing. It was a nice thing to see too with League One, was you'd peek behind the curtain and talk to these other directors. And you're like, okay, I'm actually kind of doing that. It was a lot of confirmation for me in some ways. And then in other ways, the club director at Aspire gave me the idea to do probably our most successful program ever, which was small team based stuff that was just 6 to 10 weeks. I mean, we made a lot of money off of that. And we also provided so many opportunities for little kids who wanted to play on a team that didn't want to play club. And that was something that they had done and it was successful. And he was like, dude, you should try it. And I was like, why haven't we done this yet? I mean, I think we made like more than 50 grand off that one program just because so many kids were like, we want to play on a team, but like, we don't know if we like it yet. And I'm like, fair. So stuff like that was very beneficial for us, being with League One. Um, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? Like, obviously, there are going to be like, especially at a startup like that, there's going to be some like growing pains and stuff. Um, and sometimes the communication wasn't like excellent, but for the most part, it makes sense. Like it's a growing organization. There's going to be bumps, and they were good about pretty much replying or focusing on the things when we reached out to them about stuff, which was great. So I really like enjoyed working with them a lot, and for them a lot. So yeah.
Cool. Maybe we should try and persuade them to have a splinter cell over in Scotland, see if we can get them to come and purchase a few clubs. I'm sure we
You,
can.
I mean, you might be able to get them to come out for like clinics and stuff once they, because I'm sure that someday they will expand internationally. But
There
I
we
think they're
go.
focused on doing the new Atlanta team, or not Atlanta, new LA team that they just
Yeah,
announced, which is pretty
we can
cool.
get them to
So
form an Edinburgh team. That could work. You never know.
yeah,
We'll try.
it's not
Eh,
too far of a flight.
no, not at all. You kind of chatted a little bit there about kind of working with the athletes and the athletes getting to see those pro players and like it's obviously not the same in Scotland, but you have like a lot of the times you have the senior teams that will train before the juniors
Yeah, even
salary.
that.
So that's really good. And it's also like as you know, like training with Nuvok at the moment, like we've got some of the younger players training with the seniors, and it's nice to kind of have that interaction between the seniors and the junior players. I think one of the things I know we've chatted about it, like your players didn't train that much more than ours did for throughout the week, 3, 4 hours. What were you doing? What was the kind of conversations with coaches, and how were you kind of saying, right, this is how we're going to have the most impact on the athletes we're working with, and so how are we going to do it? How are we going to use the time that we have to make sure we're getting the best out of them in that 3, 4 hours? How are we giving them the best opportunity to learn and get better?
Yeah,
Big
let's see.
question, I know that. Like it's
Yeah, it spans a lot of space. So it kind of depends on the age groups a little bit, right? I mean, if we're talking older kids, I want to see a lot more gameplay and a lot of what I would call like shaped play. So making sure that like to get what you want from the athlete, you need to change the environment to constantly feedback that. So if I wanted you and I to get better at hitting a line and we're playing 6v6, the goal of that older team is going to be like, okay, hey, every time you swing a line, you get a point. Every time you swing a line and you get a kill, you get 5 points. Your athletes are going to want to swing line. They may fail, but like they're going to go for it because they want to win the game. And I mean, even making it more, put more on the line, tell them like at 18, something that they care about. As a coach, you have the ability to like make a fool of yourself, and that will make them happy. So tell them if you do this, whoever wins this game, I will dye my hair. You will get immediate buy-in and immediate the immediacy with which they will take that. I did that during a match once, and yeah, I had to dye my hair pink. It was great, but we
would like to see
played
some
out
pictures
of
of
our
that one, Matt.
minds.
Yeah, I want to see some pictures. We might have to use those for the
I
social
know
media.
that should be the picture you guys throw up on the
Yeah.
socials. No, but so finding what the kids care about and then using that to your advantage is a big piece of it. And you're not going to find something that every single athlete cares about. You're going to find the thing that the majority of them care about, and then the two or three laggards like will come along. Um, and then I would say the younger age groups, it's the same thing. It's a lot of trying to make sure that when you're going through the thought process of like, what am I going to plan to practice today? You're thinking about, okay, I need to try and get a little bit of everything in there today. I want to make sure that we're prepared for X, whether that be a tournament, a scrimmage, just another practice afterwards. Like, is this leading into this well? And it's not just about the training piece, it's also about like their mental state, which once you add mentality into any practice, it just like times it by eight of like your thought process now could be about, okay, we're going into a tournament this weekend. And we haven't done very well at the last two tournaments. And so I need to figure out a way for them to come out of this practice really confident. So like dial back the feedback, then like negative feedback, a lot of positive feedback. Make sure that your assistants know that. Pick some games that they like and then shape the play just slightly to things that they're good at. Yeah, it's like little things like that where you're like, how do I give them confidence? What would make me feel confident? Well, I would feel confident if I was balling out at practice before we went to play. So trying to make sure that you're thinking about it from that aspect. It doesn't have to be the only focus, but like think about it a little bit when planning. As we get younger, it's more and more about making sure that they are having a good freaking time. Like if I think it was Kessel who was always like, just don't be the kid's last coach. That's your goal. Just don't be the kid's last coach. And sometimes like that's what's needed. Like make sure that they're having fun. Um, it varies a lot based on like, are we talking recreational? Are they there for a 10-week program and they're just trying to have fun and they're 12? Have a good time. Make sure that they're walking away at the end of the practice being like, I don't want to leave. You know you've done your job. If they're not wanting to leave the gym after their practice, you succeeded at that age group, right? Like you're not looking for them to walk away and be like, oh, I feel like I could be an Olympian. Like, no, man, you just, so as you climb the ladder, right? If you're going away from like the more recreational, I don't want to say rec because I feel like it makes people scared and that it's bad volleyball. It's not necessarily bad volleyball. It's just, it's not their life and main focus. And then we go into things like 13, 14-year-old teams that are a little bit more serious, making sure that they're having fun is still a huge part of that, but also leaning into and teaching them the things that they need to learn about like being a cohesive group, making sure that they understand how to manage conflict with each other. Sally was a jerk to me on Wednesday, and now I'm going to not hit any of her balls over the net that she sets me, and then I'm going to blame her for everything. Okay, so we need to have this conversation now. And it's like you're going to have those problems that come up in practice and dealing with them. But when you're like planning the practice, they're not going to be, you don't know that that's going to happen. So being able to adapt on the go, especially in that middle age group, is really important because you're going to have problems. You've got a bunch of hormonal humans in a space together that's competitive. And also, they have other stuff going on. Susie had a test last week that she failed miserably and her mom's grounded her. This girl has just got an A on a test and is doing phenomenally well. And she's like riding a high. Then you like, they're all over the place. And taking that into account and knowing again, your athletes makes a massive difference in your ability to plan for them. Um, so yeah, I would say as you kind of go up, my big things are always, I do like to see the environment doing a lot of the work. You want to feedback, but if you look at a lot of the research on feedback, making sure that feedback is external and not internal actually increases athlete retention rates. Making sure that it's a game in a lot of ways. Doing blocked practice is good. I think some people are like, oh, everything must be random. It's like, no, 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 no. We want blocked practice. We just don't want to do it until the sun comes up. Like it's great to prove a concept, right? Okay, Danny, we're gonna work on hitting the line later in the game that we're gonna play. We're gonna emphasize it with the environment and with our scoring. But before we do that, we're gonna do some situations where we're gonna teach you how to do it in a couple of different situations and increase the complexity. Start with, right? All right, we're just gonna set you. Okay, and then after that, we're gonna add a block. Okay, and then we're going to add, if we can, depending on your setter, some of the balls are going to be bad. So you're going to have to deal with crappy sets and trying to hit line. Which ultimately, if you have a 14-year-old setting, that's probably going to introduce that variable into itself. But yeah, so like kind of figuring out also and knowing, okay, Johnny is going to grab this concept really fast. So I might need to have him do something else. Or I tell him off to the side, like, we're going to do this drill. And I might tell him, hey, I want you to focus on hitting the line, but hitting high hands because he's really good. Like, I'm going to give him a secret objective because I know that he's kind of bored with this. He hit every single ball line in the first 3 seconds. And you're like, okay, we need to give him something else to do. But that's usually either end of the bell curve, right? And then you've got the kid who's awful and just like cannot figure out how to hit line. Don't necessarily fall to the smallest common denominator either. Maybe you take them aside and you teach them they actually need to work on their approach, not hitting line. You know what I mean? So that is how I think about it. Is it greatly depends on each athlete, but trying to figure out how do I get the group to row in the same direction while also helping out the kid who is lagging and helping out the kid who is succeeding. Because if you don't push that kid that's succeeding, they get bored and they do want to leave practice at the end of practice. They're like, get me out of here. I'm bored.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want that. You want that kid to feel challenged. And you have, as a coach, the ability to do that very easily. And to make that kid that is terrible, that is on your team by some miracle or whatnot, to make them feel seen and make them feel cared about. Because if you do raise that kid up just a little bit, suddenly when you do play 6-on-6, that kid is holding rally or is not hitting the ball in the net every time. And you're like, awesome. Now we can keep it going a little bit more and get more for the other kids. So yeah, that's how I think about it in a long-winded way.
That's really cool. I think, yeah, you've mentioned a couple of things there. You talk about that play-based approach and everything, which is great because our next presenter is going to be Alex Chinnery, who's based down in England. He works with Essex Rebels, who are kind of like a university team, but semi-professional. So he's kind of talk when he's talking about play-based, it's very much kind of those players, athletes have that technical ability. So the
Yeah,
kind of he won't have to do as much of that technical side. He'll do some block practice, but a lot of his stuff, we've had some good chats about that. So I'm looking forward to hear what he shares about that. So yeah, your kind of input there, there's that element of both, not block practice is not bad. It's not something that's completely disappeared from volleyball. It still has its real uses for levels and for breaking down certain aspects, but
for sure.
kind of like developing that kind of that play-based approach and change of styles. I think for me, we're kind of be we could talk for hours. I feel like this
Yeah.
is great, but I think we'll kind of I've got one more question, kind of like how we've talked there. I was very much when I started coaching, very much like that technical side. It's like, hey, let's do drills because that's how we get better, and then we'll maybe play a game at the end to have some fun, And now as I've kind of got older, I've realized that kind of no, we can do those games, we can play those all the way through practice, and we can make things work. But kind of developing my coaching style and how that works, like how have you kind of done that? You've talked about some of these people that you've spoken to, some of these coaches that are big names in the volleyball world, which if we're fortunate enough, some people get to hear from. But like, how have you developed your coaching style over the years, and how do you think what information and ideas can you share with some of the Scottish volleyball community that how they can develop their coaching skills over the in the future?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things is like kind of on the nose with what I was talking about earlier is like that community piece. You really need like two or three other coaches that that you can just like throw out crazy ideas to, that they can be like, that's insane. Don't do that. That does not pass the litmus test. But having the ability to look at a few, in my mind, really important things is don't just look at volleyball. I think a lot of volleyball coaches or coaches in general get stuck in their sport and forget that there are a bunch of other sports that are really well funded, really whatever, that you can learn a ton from. So especially in Europe, like take a look at some soccer and some football coaches. Like what are they doing that's different than what we would do? What do you see in training that they're doing? A lot of wearables at a higher level becoming a big thing, right? Now, are you going to use that with 12-year-olds? No. But could you use some video to show them like what they're doing? Yeah. How can you take whatever they're doing and maybe make it budget version? Um, a big one for me, and this kind of comes from my minor in psychology and then my majors in kinesiology and sports studies, is like look up research. Especially with like AI now, the ability to just ask it, hey, can you show me what is the most recent research or what is some high research in? And you have to know what to kind of look for, but like learning science, you need to, that's your job is to teach how to learn faster. So like if you understand how that science works, you can better apply it and the concept to volleyball. Because as a volleyball coach or a player, we know how the game works, but we might not be great at understanding the actual science behind like learning and whatnot. So I'd say dive into stuff that's not just that's more interdisciplinary. Look at other areas for sure. The other big thing is just making some really simple concepts for yourself to think about when you're making a practice plan. The first thing that I think about is like, I have this amount of time. I don't have all day. And it helps me to contextualize the whole thing of like, all right, we have, and season planning is kind of what I'm getting at here, is I have 10 practices until our first event, our first match, let's say. And I have this many hours, and these are the athletes I have. these are the skills that they have. This is what they're good and bad at. Measure stuff. Like what's measured is managed. Like go on and rate your athletes. Even if it's subjective and you do all the rating, at least you have a starting point. Because if you go through and I say, hey, I'm gonna go through and think about making it so that I can know that Johnny is a 3 in passing right now. You know that how he stacks up against everyone else on the team. And if you know the total score, right? Say everyone has a 3 and the total score is there's 10 athletes on the team, you have a score of 30. You're like, oh, well, that compares pretty well to our hitting is actually a 40. Everyone's a 4. We need to raise our setting score. Now you know what to focus on in practice. It doesn't have to be like based off stats or anything like that. It just, you need something that you can measure. And then looking at the kid, be like, has he moved up to a 4 or is he still in that space? You can quantify those numbers and go crazy with that stuff. And at the higher levels, they do that. But for just coaching younger kids, just measuring it a little bit makes it so that you can also tell the kid when they come and ask you, like, oh, coach, what do I need to work on? Pull up their sheet, man, and just tell them, like, hey, you're doing really well in these areas. You really need to work on this. If you have some time, watch some video of yourself at home and look at how you're doing these things. And I want you to watch this really good player. His name's Micah Christensen. Go watch him set a bit. You're not 6'8", but like, do the same kind of mechanic. You know what I mean? So using the ability for to measure stuff is something that I feel like is wholly underrated and not used enough because not only that, but it gives you an idea of over time the impact that you're having.
Yeah.
It gives the kids an idea of the impact that you have had on them. And it also helps you plan practices, tournaments. Like when you go to an event and you've got all these kids on your team and you're looking at the scores that they totally have, and you're like, all right, well, I know that Johnny has the best hitting score, and so does Jimmy, and they're going to be my outsides for this event. But Jimmy is really bad late game. And there are stats that'll back that up, right? Like you'll look and see, like, my friend told me about this stat that she had at UCLA where there were players that they played with that would do really well from 0 to 20, but then their hitting percentage sunk like a rock after 20. And then they had the players whose hitting percentage was like 800 from 20 to 25, but their hitting percentage sucked before that. So like, I mean, that stat's super useful because now I know end game against whatever team we're playing, especially at the older levels. All right, set Johnny. He can hit 800 after 20. But also knowing like, how do I maybe organize my rotation based on that? You can get really crazy with it, or it can just be a litmus test for you to be like, am I putting the right people on the court right now? And then you have something to back it up and help with your planning. Um, so yeah, those are the two big things that I would say, like measure stuff and look outside of just volleyball. But even just like talking, like you and I have had chats, like those help going through the process of just like, especially young coaches out there, I highly recommend you do this. Best thing I ever did. Do a school project and ask to interview coaches and then ask them all of your questions. I did this with Karch. I did this with Russ Rose at Penn State. I did this with Mike Wall at Gold Medal Squared. I did this with a bunch of people right out of college, and I learned a ton because I had questions that I wanted to ask. And then I also learned that I was asking some wrong questions that were just like not helpful at all. But going through that process was really helpful for me. But yeah, just staying curious and trying to learn stuff from other places and other coaches around you. There's no one there's not one way to skin a cat. There's no one perfect way to coach. It's really, in my mind, knowing the athletes, knowing who you're working with so that you can help them be the best version of themselves that you can help them become. And someone else might be good at helping them with something else, right? So like your assistant might be way better at teaching them how to hit, whereas you might be really good at teaching them how to like be a team. Like that's a skill. So yeah, those are the two big things I think, or three big things. Yeah.
2 or 3, yeah. Huge. I think like I really like that point you make at the end, the opportunity to learn from other people. Like I've loved doing SVlearn last year and this year.
Yeah.
just being kind of like sending out messages to folk and being like, "Hey, can I interview you?
Yeah.
For this thing that we're doing." And a lot of people are like, "Yeah, sure." And I think it's forced me to get out of my comfort zone and ask a few people that I normally wouldn't. But it's been
Yeah.
great. It's been really helpful because for me, I love the opportunity to learn and find new information. So and by bringing it to our members, it's kind of hopefully making it a little bit easier and then hopefully opens up their curiosity in the future.
Yeah.
I think those last few points, about kind of knowing the athletes and kind of getting some measurables for them is huge. And it's kind of a big, a big part of kind of coaching and learning how to get better as a coach. But no,
Yeah.
I think a huge amount of information over the whole podcast over this chat here, Mac. Like, I think I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it again because I think we're a lot of really useful things that are kind of I've heard. And I'm like, I'm gonna ask you about that, and then kind of not being able to. But I'm sure we'll have a few more chats over the next few weeks, because I know you're in Edinburgh at the moment, but we're gonna be move. You're going back to the States soon. Hopefully not
Yes.
too soon. So
Yes. Head back in December. So I'll be
yeah,
back stateside around the holidays.
yeah,
But yeah, no, this has been really fun to just like anything I can do to like help out education wise. And I mean, not by any means anything, everything I say is not super, super awesome. But at the same time, like I feel like I've acquired some knowledge. So like even having this conversation and then having other people come back to me and be like, "Ah, I don't agree with that." Like that to me also helps me get better at understanding the athletes and understand like how I want to do things because I have strong opinions as a coach. I think we all do, but they're loosely held. Like I have a strong idea of what I want to do, but at the same time, if you come in and have a different thought process, it is something that everyone should consider. And that's another big coaching point I think too is like sometimes you get athletes that are like, Coach, what about this? And you're like, you need to like step out of your ego for a second, and be like, this 12-year-old just told me that I should do this. And sometimes you have to be like, yeah, Jimmy, you're right. That is a way better way to do this. You're bang on. Let's change it. So yeah,
no, it's good.
this has been fun.
And I know we chatted about the app. I think I'm going to leave it. I think we'll probably maybe get you back on in 6 months or so when
Yeah,
it's up and running, and we can maybe get a few people on to do some testing in Scottish volleyball. So we'll kind of
yeah, that would be
we'll keep the
awesome.
listeners guessing, hopefully for that one, and we can get something there. But yeah,
Perfect.
thanks again, Matt. Really appreciate your time today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you again in the future.